Hello, everybody. Welcome to all the viewers of Manavahini, and welcome to a reading of Sophie's World. Reading the fifth reading.
Vishwa
Episode.
I think you forgot the name of your channel, sir.
Yeah.
Prajna.
Oh, sorry. This is not Manavahini. This is Visopragna. I'm so sorry. I'm so used to participating there. Okay. So the channel's name is Visopragna. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. But welcome to a reading of Sophie's World. Philosophy 101 Introduction to the Western Philosophy. And in the panel, we have SK Garu and Lawyer Garu. Welcome, sir. Welcome, SK Garu. And last
Thanks
time
for
we
having me.
stopped at, yeah, thank you, sir. Last time we were getting introduced to the Socrates model of philosophy and thought process. And we are now continuing into the next subchapter of this book called Athens. So, SK Garu, please, floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Okay. Athens. Several tall buildings had risen from the ruins. Early that evening, Sophie's mother went to visit a friend. As soon as she was out of the house, Sophie went down the garden to the den. There she found a thick package beside the big cookie tin. Sophie tore it open. It was a video cassette. She ran back to the house. A videotape? How on earth did the philosopher know they had a VCR? And what was on the cassette? Sophie put the cassette into the recorder. A sprawling city appeared on the TV screen. As the camera zoomed in on the Acropolis, Sophie realized that the city must be Athens. She had often seen pictures of the ancient ruins there. It was a live shot. Summer clad tourists with cameras slung about them were swarming among the ruins. One of them looked as if he was carrying a notice board. There it was again. Didn't it say Hilda? After a minute or two, there was a close up of a middle aged man. He was rather short, with a black, well trimmed beard, and he was wearing a blue beret. He looked into the camera and said, "Welcome to Athens, Sophie. As you have probably..."
It is pronounced as beret, not beret.
Beret. Okay. What is beret?
ఆ క్యాప్ వస్తుంది చూడండి రౌండ్ గా ఉండి ఒక సైడ్ కి పెట్టుకుంటారు చూసారా?
Oh, beret.
So,
Oh.
beret is a cap, it's a flat cap
Mm.
that is used in the military and that is used by the forces typically. So, in the US, for example, there is this entire regiment of people called Green Berets. So, they're
Mhm.
supposed to be one of the finest army regiments. So, they wear a green cap, flat cap, basically, flat on top.
Okay.
So, hello, sir, Vishwa, sir, SK Garu, and Savan, sir. I'm
I think
Yeah,
sorry.
sir.
welcome to the panel.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry I'm late. I got up in something else, sir.
No, we started late anyway, so we just started. All right, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes.
Okay. He was rather short with a black, well trimmed beard, and he was wearing a blue beret. He looked into the camera and said, "Welcome to Athens, Sophie. As you have probably guessed, I am Alberto Knox. If not, I'll just reiterate that the big rabbit is still being pulled from the top hat of the universe. We are standing at the Acropolis. The word means citadel, or more precisely, the city on the hill. Citadel, is that right? Pronunciation? Okay. The word means citadel, or more precisely, the city on the hill. People have lived up here since the Stone Age. The reason, naturally, was its unique location. The elevated plateau was easy to defend against marauders. From the Acropolis, there was also an excellent view down to one of the best harbors in the Mediterranean. As the early Athens began to develop on the plain below the plateau, the Acropolis was used as a fortress and sacred shrine. During the first half of the 5th century before Common Era, a bitter war was waged against the Persians. And in 480, the Persian king Xerxes, okay, plundered Athens and burned all the old wooden buildings of the Acropolis. A year later, the Persians were defeated, and that was the beginning of the golden age of Athens. The Acropolis was rebuilt. prouder and more magnificent than ever, and now purely as a sacred shrine. This was the period when Socrates walked through the streets and squares talking with the Athenians. He could thus have witnessed the rebirth of the Acropolis and watched the construction of all the proud buildings we see around us. And what a building site it was. Behind me, you can see the biggest temple, the Par- Parthenon, which means the Virgin's place. It was built in honor of Athene, the patron, the patron
It's
goddess of
Athena. It's Athena, the goddess.
Athena. Okay, it was built in honor of Athena.
SK
The
garu,
Hmm?
can you please give me the page number and
44.
okay, all right. Please carry on.
Okay. Okay. It was built in honor of Athena, the patron goddess
And
of
sorry to interrupt. And they're called Athenians.
Athenians. Okay.
Yep.
Hmm. It was built in honor of Athena, the patron goddess of Athens. The huge marble structure does not have a single straight line. All four sides are slightly curved to make the building appear less heavy. In spite of its colossal dimensions, it gives the impression of lightness. In other words, it presents an optical illusion. The columns lean slightly
Uh,
inwards.
uh, just a second. The colossal dimensions antaru. Have you seen the Rome Colosseum? You might have seen, right?
SF lo చూసా.
Yeah, wherever. అయితే ఆ కొలోజియం డైమెన్షన్స్ అంటే అంత హ్యూజ్ స్ట్రక్చర్ అని అర్థం అనమాట. ఇట్స్ రెఫరెన్స్.
Oh, Colosseum itself. Oh, it's ఇదన్నమాట. Oh, నేను ఇంకా
And it's not colossal. It's like colossal.
colossal.
Yep.
So it's Colosseum.
Yep. Colosseum. Correct.
Oh. In other words, it presents an optical illusion. The columns lean slightly inwards and would form a pyramid 1500 meters high if they were continued to a point above the temple. The temple contained nothing but a 12-meter high statue of Athena. Okay. The white marble, which in those days was painted in vivid colors, was transported here from a mountain 16 kilometers away. Sophie sat with her heart in her mouth. Was this really the philosopher talking to her? She had only seen his profile that one time in the darkness. Could he be the same man who was now standing at the Acropolis in Athens? He began to walk along the length of the temple, and the camera followed him. He walked right to the edge of the terrace and pointed out over the landscape. The camera focused on an old theater which lay just below the plateau of Acropolis. There you can see the old Dia- Dionysos Theater. Okay, that's some theater name, looks like. Okay. Continued the man in the beret. It is probably the very oldest theater in Europe. This is where the great tragedies of A- Es- Aeschylus,
Aeschylus,
Sophocles,
Sophocles,
Sophocles, and Euripides. Bad, very bad. Okay.
Euripides,
Euripides.
whatever,
Euripides.
Euripides.
Okay.
Like
This,
Archimedes. Think about it. That's how you need to end.
uh-huh. D's. Okay. Okay.
ఈ ఆర్కిమెడిస్ పేరు మీకు తెలుసు కదండి. ఇట్ ఈస్ సో సెడ్ దట్ he founded the buoyancy theory, water displacement.
Yeah. And Sophocles, same thing. Right? Aeschylus.
Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides.
Euripides.
Okay. So these were
Anyway,
performed
these are,
during-
again, remember, these are names. So
Right.
there's a lot of flexibility in pronouncing them.
Yeah. So these great tragedies were performed during the time of Socrates. I referred earlier to the ill-fated king
Oedipus.
Oedipus. Okay. The tragedy about him by Sophocles was first performed here. But they also played comedies. The best known writer of comedies was Aristophanes,
Correct అండి.
who also wrote a spiteful comedy about Socrates as the buffoon of Athens. Right at the back, you can see the stone wall, which the actors used as a backdrop. It was called Skene, Skene, and is the origin of our word scene. Incidentally, the word theater comes from an old Greek word meaning to see. Oh, theater ante to see. Okay. But we must get back to the philosophers, Sophie. We are going around the Parthenon
Par-
and
Parthenon.
Parthenon and down through the gateway. The little man walked around the huge temple and passed some smaller temples on his right. Then he began to walk down some steps between several tall columns. When he reached the foot of the Acropolis, he went up a small hill and pointed out toward Athens. The hill we are standing on is called Areopagos. Areopagus. Okay.
No, Areopagos is correct.
Pagos. Okay.
Areopagos or Areopagos.
Pagos. Okay.
Yeah.
Areopagos. Okay. It was here that the High
Athenian.
Athenian High Court of Justice passed judgment in murder trials. Many hundreds of years later, Saint Paul, the
Apostle.
Apostle.
apostle,
Apostle.
okay,
Yeah.
apostle, Saint Paul, the apostle, stood here and preached about Jesus and Christianity to the Athenians. We shall return to what he said on a later occasion. Down to the left, you can see the remains of the old city square in Athens, the Agora. Oh.
The market.
Sometime. Okay. With the exception of the large temple of
Hephaestus.
Hephaestus, the god of smiths and metal workers, only some blocks of marble are preserved. Let us go down. The next moment he appeared among the ancient ruins. High up beneath the sky, at the top of Sophie's screen, towered the monumental Athena temple on the Acropolis. Her philosophy teacher had seated himself on one of the blocks of marble. He looked into the camera and said, "We are sitting in the old agora in Athens."
Athens. Whatever. Yeah.
A sorry sight, don't you think? Today, I mean, but once it was surrounded by splendid temples, courts of justice, and other public offices, shops, a concert hall, and even a large gymnastics building, all situated around the square, which was a large open space. The whole of European civilization was founded in this modest area.
So here I have to make a plug. I'm sure there are many places like this, but I've seen one such place in University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. So there is actually literally a square that looks like the Athenian square. Right? And that is where all the students sort of get together and have a conversation and things like that. There are food courts right next to the square and that kind of stuff, basically.
Okay. Words such as politics and democracy, economy and history, biology and physics, mathematics and logic, theology and philosophy, ethics and psychology, theory and method, idea and system date back to the tiny populace whose everyday life centered around the square. This is where Socrates spent so much of his time talking to the people he met. He might have buttonholed a slave bearing a jar of olive oil and asked the unfortunate man a question on philosophy. For Socrates held that a slave had the same common sense as a man of rank. Perhaps he stood in an animated wrangle with one of the citizens, or held a subdued conversation with his young pupil Plato. It is extraordinary to think about. We'll speak of Socratic or Platonic philosophy, but actually being Plato or Socrates is quite another matter. Sophie certainly did think it was extraordinary to think about, but she thought it was just as extraordinary the way her philosopher was suddenly talking to her on a video that had been brought to her own secret hideout in the garden by a mysterious dog. The philosopher rose from the block of marble he was sitting on and said quietly, "It was actually my intention to leave it at that, Sophie. I wanted you to see the Acropolis and the remains of the old agora in Athens. But I'm not yet sure that you have grasped just how splendid these surroundings once were. So I'm very tempted to go a bit further. It is quite irregular, of course, but I'm sure I can count on it remaining just between the two of us. Oh, well, a tiny glimpse will suffice anyway." He said no more, but remained standing there for a long time, staring into the camera. While he stood there, several tall buildings had risen from the ruins. As if by magic, all the old buildings were once again standing. Above the skyline, Sophie could still see the Acropolis, but now both that and all the buildings down on the square were brand new. They were covered with gold and painted in garish colors.
Yeah, garish colors, same thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Ante? Garish colors ante?
Bold colors.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like red, yellow, plain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
They were
I'll find the
covered.
meaning, exact meaning, but yeah,
Mm,
that's what I think that's what it means. Anyway.
okay. They were covered with gold and painted in garish colors. Gaily gaily dressed people were strolling about the square. Some wore swords, others carried jars on their heads, and one of them had a roll of papyrus under his arm. Papyrus.
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 Papyrus అంటే పేపర్ అండి, ద ఓల్డ్ ఫామ్.
Oh, had a roll of papyrus under his arm. Okay. Then Sophie recognized her philosophy teacher. He was still wearing the blue beret, but now he was dressed in a yellow tunic in the same style as everyone else. He came towards Sophie, looked into the camera, and said, "That's better. Now we are in the Athens of antiquity, Sophie. I wanted you to come here in person, you see. We are in the year 402 before Common Era, only 3 years before Socrates dies. I hope you appreciate this exclusive visit because it was very difficult to hire a video camera." Sophie felt dizzy. How could this weird man suddenly be in Athens 2400 years ago? How could she be seeing a video film of a totally different age? There were no videos in antiquity. So, could this be a movie? But all the marble buildings looked real. If they had recreated all of the old square in Athens as well as the Acropolis just for the sake of a film, the sets would have cost a fortune. At any rate, it would be a colossal price to pay just to teach Sophie about Athens. The man in the beret looked up at her again. "Do you see those two men over there under the colonnade?" Sophie noticed an elderly
Yeah,
man.
yeah, that would be colonnade,
Colonnade.
just like promenade. So it's probably some kind of space under or right next to the two columns, or
Oh,
like two
okay.
columns are supporting a beam and then they are sitting under it or something like that.
Some sunshade kind of.
Tamil Nadu.
Colonnade. Chettinad. Sophie noticed an elderly man in a crumpled tunic. He had a long, unkempt beard, a snub nose, eyes like gimlets, and chubby cheeks. Beside him stood a hand, some young man. "That is Socrates and his pupil Plato. You are going to meet them personally." The philosopher went over to the two men, took off his beret, and said something which Sophie did not understand. It must have been in Greek. Then he looked into the camera and said, "I told them you were a Norwegian girl who would very much like to meet them. So now Plato will give you some questions to think about. But we must do it quickly before the guards discover us. Sophie felt the blood pounding in her temples as the young man stepped forward and looked into the camera. Welcome to Athens. Athens. Okay, welcome to Athens, Sophie, he said in a gentle voice. He spoke with an accent. My name is Plato, and I'm going to give you 4 tasks. First, you must think over how a baker can bake 50 absolutely identical cookies. Then you can ask yourself why all horses are the same. Next, you must decide whether you think that man
Sorry,
has
SK garu, horses కాదు, horses.
horses.
Anyway, sorry.
నేను కరెక్ట్ చేసుకున్నాను.
Go ahead. They are horses, not horses. Anyway, I thought, okay, no, please go ahead.
నా వల్లే ప్రాబ్లం అవుతుందంటే నేను వెళ్ళిపోతాను.
No, please go ahead.
Sir,
It's
sir,
fun.
you
It's fun.
have-
You should
you
take
have
it in
no
the
right
right
to-
spirit.
Sir, you have no right to laugh at us, sir.
No, I have absolutely no right. I'm so sorry. You should take it. I mean, I am still in awe of that scenery that is being
Yeah.
described, right? It's like Athens comes to life, and then Socrates and Plato are
Correct.
right there.
Yeah.
So what a moment.
SK garu, I am with you అండి. Horses is the only correct word. Please go on.
Okay. So first question ఏంటి? Okay. How a baker can bake 50 absolutely identical cookies. Then you can ask yourself why all horses are the same. Next, you must decide whether you think that man has an immortal soul. And finally, you must say whether men and women are equally sensible. Good luck. So, 4 tasks. Then the picture on the TV screen disappeared. Sophie wound and rewound the tape, but she had seen all there was. Sophie tried to think things through clearly, but as soon as she thought one thought, another one crowded in before she had thought the first one to its end. She had known from the start that her philosophy teacher was eccentric. But when he started to use teaching methods that defied all the laws of nature, Sophie thought he was going too far. Had she really seen Socrates and Plato on TV? Of course not. That was impossible. But it definitely wasn't a cartoon. Sophie took the cassette out of the video recorder and ran up to her room with it. She put it on the top shelf with all the Lego blocks. Then she sank onto the bed, exhausted, and fell asleep. Some hours later, her mother came into the room. She shook Sophie gently and said, "What's the matter, Sophie?" Okay. You have gone to sleep with all your clothes on? Sophie blinked her eyes sleepily. "I've been to Athens," she mumbled. That was all she could manage to say as she turned over and went back to sleep. That's the
Okay.
story of Athens.
So, sir, can I?
Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Would you like to comment, or shall I go to?
No comments. Obviously, it was a dream, so, but nevertheless, a very good one.
Any comments welcome except on my horses.
No horses. That was just, yeah. So because she was very involved in this whole philosophy and Greece and Socrates and all that, the girl had a dream basically, and a very wonderful dream actually, and the 4 questions
So
as well. So she even got some questions.
Did you just say dream?
Yeah.
Where was it told?
I don't know. I mean, I felt that it was actually not all this like beautiful scenery and all that, right? Maybe some of it was there in the video cassette, but some of it was our own imagination. Anyway, the picture on the TV had disappeared. Sophie wound and rewound the tape, but nevertheless, whether it's a dream or whether it's reality, it doesn't matter. The main point is there are 4 questions, right? So let's focus in on that. It was a good dream with 4 questions, or it was a good reality or videotape that had 4 questions that are very thought provoking.
Okay. All
All
right,
right,
sir.
sir. Now to onward and forward.
Yeah. Onward to the next subchapter, titled Plato, a longing to return to the realm of the soul. Sophie woke up with a start early the next morning. She glanced at the clock. It was only a little after 5, but she was so wide awake that she sat up in the bed. Why was she wearing a dress? Then she remembered everything. She climbed onto a stool and looked down the top shelf of the closet. Yes, there at the back was the video cassette. It hadn't been a dream after all, at least not all of it. But she couldn't really have seen Plato and Socrates. Oh, never mind. She didn't have the energy to think about it anymore. Perhaps her mother was right. Perhaps she was acting a bit nuts these days. Anyway, she couldn't go back to sleep. Perhaps she ought to go down to the den and see if the dog had left another letter. Sophie crept downstairs, put on a pair of jogging shoes, and went out. In the garden, everything was wonderfully clear and still. The birds were chirping so energetically that Sophie could hardly keep from laughing. The morning dew twinkled in the grass like drops of crystal. Once again, she was struck by the incredible wonder of the world. Inside the old hedge, it was also very damp. Sophie saw no new letter from the philosopher, but nevertheless she wiped off one of the thick roots and sat down. She recalled that the video Plato had given her some questions to answer. The first was something about how a baker could bake 50 identical cookies. Sophie had to think very carefully about that because it definitely wouldn't be easy. When her mother occasionally baked a batch of cookies, they were never all exactly the same. But then she was not an expert pastry cook. Sometimes the kitchen looked as if a bomb had hit it. Even the cookies they bought at the baker's were never exactly the same. Every single cookie was shaped separately at the baker's at the bakers were never exactly the same. Every single cookie was shaped separately in the baker's hands. Then a satisfied smile spread over Sophie's face. She remembered how once she and her father went shopping while her mother was busy baking Christmas cookies. When they got back there, when they got back, there were a lot of gingerbread men spread out on the kitchen table. Even though they weren't all perfect, in a way, they were all the same. And why was that? Obviously, because her mother had used the same mold for all of them. Sophie felt so pleased with herself for having remembered the incident that she pronounced herself done with the first question. If a baker makes 50 absolutely identical cookies, he must be using the same pastry mold for all of them. And that's that, and that's that. Then the
Yeah,
video
yeah. Wait,
Plato.
sir.
Sorry.
Wait 1 second here. So that's
All
why
right.
in the, today also they use this term, right? It's called cookie cutter solution. Have you heard about it?
Yeah, no, sir.
Yeah. That's what they mean.
Kani
they, they,
Vishwagaru?
Cookie cutter
yes,
solution.
ma'am. They use it a lot in the US, by the way. Cookie cutter solution. Yeah, template.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, templatized.
Temp. Right, sir.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead,
SK
please.
garu,
Hmm.
SK garu.
Uh,
You forgot. That's okay.
Okay.
No worries.
Kada,
Okay.
like if having a mold is the answer, like for
That is her answer.
there. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, once she reaches the point of like the fourth task, which is about men and women equally sensible and all, then it's
Yeah.
like she should tell herself that each of them will have a separate mold, then, right?
Well,
Which
let's
is
see.
not,
I don't
yeah.
know. There could be different molds.
Mm. Correct, maybe. Yeah,
Yeah.
she'll realize. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
All
ahead.
right.
Okay. Then the video Plato had looked into the camera and asked why all the horses were the same. But they weren't at all. On the contrary, Sophie thought no two horses were the same, just as no two people were the same. She was ready to give up on that one when she remembered what she had thought about the cookies. No one of them was exactly like any of the others. Some were a bit thicker than the others, and some were broken, but still, everyone could see that they were, in a way, exactly the same. What Plato was really asking was perhaps why a horse was always a horse and not, for example, a cross between a horse and a pig. Because even though some horses were as brown as bears and others were as white as lambs, all horses had something in common. Sophie had yet to meet a horse with 6 or 8 legs, for example. But surely Plato couldn't believe that what made all horses alike was that they were made with the same mold. Then Plato had asked her a really difficult question. Does man have an immortal soul? That was something Sophie felt quite unqualified to answer. All she knew was that dead bodies were either cremated or buried, so there was no future for them. If man had an immortal soul, one would have to believe that a person consisted of two separate parts, a body that gets worn out after many years, and a soul that operates more or less independently of what happens to the body. Her grandmother had said once that she felt it was only her body that was old. Inside, she had always been the same young girl. The thought of the young girl led Sophie to the last question. Are women and men equally sensible? She was not so sure about that. It depended on what Plato meant by sensible. Something the philosopher had said about Socrates came into her mind. Socrates had pointed out that everyone could understand philosophical truths if they just used their common sense. He had also said that a slave had the same common sense as a noble man. Sophie was sure that he would also have said that women had the same common sense as men. While she sat thinking, there was a sudden rustling in the hedge and the sound of something puffing and blowing like a steam engine. The next second, the golden Labrador slipped into the den. It had a large envelope in its mouth. Sorry. Hermes, cried Sophie. Drop it, drop it. The dog dropped
She
the
said it is
envelope.
Hermes, not Hermes.
Okay, sir. Hermes, cried Sophie. Drop it, drop it. The dog dropped the envelope in Sophie's lap, and Sophie stretched out her hand to pat the dog's head. Good boy, Hermes, she said. The dog lay down and allowed itself to be patted. But after a couple of minutes, it got up and began to push its way back through the hedge the same way it had come. Sophie followed with the brown envelope in her hand. She crawled through the dense thicket and was soon outside the garden. Hermes had already started to run toward the edge of the woods, and Sophie followed a few yards behind. Twice the dog turned around and growled, but Sophie was not to be deterred. This time she was determined to find the philosopher, even if it meant running all the way to Athens. The dog ran faster and suddenly turned off down a narrow path. Sophie chased him, but after a few minutes he turned and faced her, barking like a watchdog. Sophie still refused to give up, taking the opportunity to lessen the distance between them. Hermes turned and raced down the path. Sophie realized that she would never catch up with him. She stood quite still for what seemed like an eternity, listening to him running farther and farther away. Then all was silent. She sat down on a tree stump by a little clearing in the woods. She still had the brown envelope in her hand. She opened it, drew out several typewritten pages, and began to read. Sir, shall I continue, sir? Plato's Academy, the next
Yeah.
chapter.
So if SK wants to read, we can give it to her. Otherwise, you can continue, sir. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead,
SK
SK.
Garu?
Yeah. Let me take it.
Okay.
Okay. So, yeah, Plato's Academy. Thank you for the pleasant time we spent together, Sophie. In Athens, I mean. So now I have at least introduced myself. And since I have also introduced Plato, we might as well begin without further ado. Plato, 428 to 347 before Common Era, was 29 years old when Socrates drank the hemlock. He had been a pupil of Socrates for some time and had followed his trial very closely. The fact that Athens could condemn its noblest citizen to death did more than make a profound impression on him. It was to shape the course of his entire philosophic endeavor. To Plato, the death of Socrates was a striking example of the conflict that can exist between society as it really is and the true or ideal society. Plato's first deed as a philosopher was to publish Socrates' Apology, an account of his plea to the large jury. As you will no doubt recall, Socrates never wrote anything down, although many of the pre Socratics did. The problem is that hardly any of their written material remains. But in the case of Plato, we believe that all his principal works have been preserved. In addition to Socrates' Apology, Plato wrote a collection of epistles and about 25 philosophical dialogues. That we have these works today is due not least to the fact that Plato set up his own school of philosophy in a grove not far from Athens, named after the legendary Greek hero Academus. Hmm. The school was therefore known as the Academy. Since then, many thousands of academies have been established all over the world. We still speak of academics and academic subjects. The subjects taught at Plato's Academy were philosophy, mathematics, and gymnastics. Although perhaps taught is hardly the right word. Lively discourse was considered most important at Plato's Academy. So it was not purely by chance that Plato's writings took the form of dialogues. Okay, next subtopic, the eternally true, eternally beautiful, and eternally good. In the introduction to this course, I mentioned that it could often be a good idea to ask what a particular philosopher's project was. So now I ask, what were the problems Plato was concerned with? Briefly, we can establish that Plato was concerned with the relationship between what is eternal and immutable on the one hand and what flows on the other, just like the pre Socratics, in fact. We have seen how the sophists and Socrates turned their attention from questions of natural philosophy to problems related to a man and society. And yet, in one sense, even Socrates and the sophists were preoccupied with the relationship between the eternal and immutable and the flowing. They were interested in the problem as it related to human morals and society's ideals or virtues. Very briefly, the sophists thought that perceptions of what was right or wrong varied from one city state to another and from one generation to the next. So, right and wrong was something that flowed. This was totally unacceptable to Socrates. He believed in the existence of eternal and absolute rules for what was right or wrong. By using our common sense, we can all arrive at these immutable norms, since human reason is in fact eternal and immutable. Do you follow, Sophie? Then along comes Plato. He is concerned with both what is eternal and immutable in nature and what is eternal and immutable as regards morals and society. To Plato, these two problems were one and the same. He tried to grasp a reality that was eternal and immutable. And to be quite frank, that is precisely what we need philosophers for. We do not need them to choose a beauty queen or the day's bargain in tomatoes. This is why they are often unpopular. Philosophers will try to ignore highly topical affairs and instead try to draw people's attention to what is eternally true, eternally beautiful, and eternally good. We can thus begin to glimpse at least the outline of Plato's philosophical project. But let's take one thing at a time. We are attempting to understand an extraordinary mind, a mind that was to have a profound influence on all subsequent European philosophy, the world of ideas. Ah,
Skegar,
mm,
I'll take it and
sure, sure.
the world of ideas. Both Empedocles and Democritus had drawn attention to the fact that although in the natural world everything quote unquote flows, there must nevertheless be quote unquote something that never changes, the four roots or the atoms. Plato agreed with the proposition as such, but in quite a different way. Plato believed that everything tangible in nature, quote unquote, flows. So there are no, quote unquote, substances that do not dissolve. Absolutely everything that belongs to the quotes, in quotes, material world is made of a material that time can erode. I'll repeat this sentence. Absolutely everything that belongs to the material world is made of a material that time can erode. But everything is made after a timeless mold or form that is eternal and immutable. You see? No, you don't. Why are those horses the same, Sophie? You probably don't think they are at all. But there is something that all horses have in common, something that enables us to identify them as horses. A particular horse flows naturally. It might be old and lame, and in time it will die. But the form of the horse is eternal and immutable. That which is eternal and immutable to Plato is therefore not a physical, in quotes, basic substance, as it was for Empedocles and Democritus. Plato's conception was of eternal and immutable patterns, spiritual and abstract in their nature, that all things are fashioned after. Let me put it like this. The pre-Socratics had given a reasonably good explanation of natural change without having to presuppose that anything actually changed. In the midst of nature's cycle, there were there were some eternal and immutable smallest elements that did not dissolve, they thought. Fair enough, Sophie, but they had no reasonable explanation for how these smallest elements that were once building blocks in a horse could suddenly whirl together 400 or 500 years later and fashion themselves into a completely new horse, or an elephant, or a crocodile for that matter. Plato's point was that Democritus' atoms never fashioned themselves into an elidile or or a crocophant. Elidile or a crocophant. This was what set his philosophical reflections going. If you already understand what I am getting at, you may skip this next paragraph, but just in case, I will clarify. You have a box of Lego and you build a Lego horse. You then take it apart and put the blocks back in the box. You cannot expect to make a new horse just by shaking the box. How could Lego blocks of their own accord find each other and become a new horse again? No. You have to rebuild the horse, Sophie. And the reason you can do it is that you have a picture in your mind of what the horse looked like. The Lego horse is made from a model which remains unchanged from horse to horse. How did you do with the 50 identical cookies? Let us assume that you have, you have dropped in from outer space and have never seen a baker before. You stumble into a tempting bakery and then you catch sight of 50 identical gingerbread men on a shelf. I imagine you would wonder how they could be exactly alike. It might well be that one of them has an arm missing, another has lost a bit of its head, and a third has a funny bump on its head. But after careful thought, you would nevertheless conclude that all gingerbread men have something in common. Although none of them is perfect, you would suspect that they had a common origin. You would realize that all the cookies were formed in the same mold. And what is more, Sophie, you are now seized by the irresistible desire to see this mold, because clearly the mold itself must be utter perfection, and in a sense more beautiful in comparison with these crude copies. If you solved this problem all by yourself, you arrived at the philosophical solution in exactly the same way that Plato did. Like most philosophers, he dropped in from outer space. He stood up on the very tip of one of the fine hairs of the rabbit's fur. He was astonished at the way all natural phenomena could be so alike, and he concluded that it had to be because there are a limited number of forms behind everything we see around us. Plato called these forms ideas. Behind every horse, pig, or human being, there is the idea horse, idea pig, and idea human being. In the same way, the bakery we spoke of can have gingerbread men, gingerbread horses, and gingerbread pigs. Because every self respecting bakery has more than one mold, but one mold is enough for each type of gingerbread cookie. Plato came to the conclusion that there must be a reality behind the material world. He called this reality the world of ideas. It contained the eternal and immutable patterns behind the various phenomena we come across in the nature. This remarkable view is known as Plato's theory of ideas. Wonderful, sir. Sir, uh, uh, in some, I think, philosophy class I heard of back in the day about the Western philosophy. I could remember such similar class between the material world and the world of ideas. Now I, I, I came to understand how Plato came to this conclusion.
Wonderful.
That's it.
So, would you like to conclude
Yeah,
or you want to continue?
yeah. Let's discuss for a little bit, sir, here, because one of the things that is very important to note here is that there is a SK Garu, you are familiar with object-oriented programming, right?
Mm.
So there, uh, there is a class and there is an object. The class is the template, and the object is an instantiation of that template. Do you hear me? Am I being heard?
Yes.
Okay. So
You are being
similarly,
heard loud and clear.
yeah. So similarly, it is the same concept here. You cannot have an object without a class. You see?
Mm.
So that's so the
సార్
idea
మాకు
still
కొంచెం
remain. Yeah.
మానవుల భాషలో చెప్పండి సార్ ఈ ఓప్స్ గిప్స్
So
మాకు తెలియవు.
yeah. So class is the idea, sir, and the object is the manifestation of the idea. So behind the
ఓకే.
horse, yeah. So horse is the actual physical manifestation, and the idea that a horse needs to have four legs, it has to have a tail, blah blah, etc. Right? So that is your class, basically the class object relationship, object oriented programming.
Mm.
ఇదో మా చిన్నప్పుడు ఎప్పుడు విన్నాను సార్ ఓప్స్ అని చెప్పి ఇక్కడ చందానగర్ అమీర్పేట బోర్డులు పెట్టేవాళ్ళు.
Yeah. So yeah. So that is, in a way, this is the idea that Plato proposed, basically, right?
Mm.
Yeah. Go ahead, sir. So where are we? Which page are we on? So Plato is done,
Page
Yeah, now
51,
it is
sir.
true
and then
knowledge.
Plato's Academy is done.
Yeah, it is true knowledge, sir.
The world of ideas,
The world of
so
ideas is complete. And
complete.
yeah,
True knowledge. Let's do true knowledge next week.
Okay.
okay, all right,
Yeah.
sir. To you.
So any discussion, comments?
Knowledge. I mean, sir, what I wanted to say one thing, sir, about this. So the Western philosophy, how it developed, what I'm understanding from this book, this particular chapter is, they want to fit everything into uh, every everything into a certain term called logic. That is what I understood, sir. And when we were reading the history of economics, there came a concept of blind spot, right, sir? You have explained it to me. I cannot reiterate everything as you said. There is a blind spot that we don't know at all of what it might be. So they are completely ignorant of that blind spot and trying to fit everything into their ideology of logic. If it does not fit into logic, then it is termed as something what do you say, nonsense, maybe, probably. They that's what they are trying to make out of it, sir. That's what I feel. So,
Yeah. So it's basically, well, you don't know what you don't know kind of logic, right? Yeah, absolutely.
exactly, sir.
And if you don't make enough concessions for what you don't know, then you will
Yeah,
be only stuck with what you know and what you know that you don't know. That's all.
exactly, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Good deal.
I
But yeah,
I remember a funny incident from a TV series called Friends. Sir, I'm sure most of you are aware of the Friends series, the sitcom.
yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So in that series, uh, Phoebe asks Ross that questions the theory of evolution to Ross and asks and questions him that the theory of evolution might be wrong, but Ross completely supports the theory of evolution by saying we have all the evidence, we have all the proofs. What did you study in your school and everything of that? And Phoebe keeps pushing him that don't you think that don't you think that there is an very slightest of the chance that all this might be false and puts him in a spot in such a kind of spot. Then he caves in and says, "Yeah, yes, there might be a very slightest chance that it all the theory of evolution might be wrong." And later comes the comedy that how can you cave in like that? How can you go to your college and show your face to all your scholars? So in that brief dialogue, that part is very true, sir. Actually, that's what I felt. Even from what we have studied right now, that's it, sir. So coming back to the same concept of what you don't know is what you don't know. Acknowledging of that fact. That's it, sir, from my side. SK Garu, Shravan sir, any comments?
Nothing from my side.
Yeah. No, I think we can close. That was a good session.
Yeah, it was a very good session, sir. It was actually very revealing how this Western philosophy is developing. And
Yeah.
yeah,
All right. So to all the people who are watching and all the people that are going to watch it, please like and subscribe to the Visapragna channel if you haven't already done so. Please like the video, and if you have any questions or comments, please post them under the video and we'll try to answer them. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.